Hi, everyone. It's 1:26 right now. We'll probably start around 1:35-ish. I don't know how many participants there are, but I know that there's another training happening at 1:30. It was a conscious discipline, I believe, which a lot of the other people are attending. So we'll probably wait until 1:35 and get started.
I think the other one was the Growth Summit, not the Conscious Discipline, because that's just on Thursdays and Fridays.
Oh, got it. You're probably right. And I wonder why we don't have more. Hi, I noticed a couple of you have joined us. We're probably going to start around 1:35 to see if anyone trickles in. Thank you. All right, it's 1:34. We don't have Brian, our clerical assistant, today to kind of give us a Zoom intro, but he did send me his little script. So I'm going to go over it fairly quickly. Most of you are already on mute, which it seems like you're pretty savvy with Zoom. So I won't spend too much time on it. So welcome to today's professional development. Today it's on MTSS Tier 1 strategies and support. During the presentation, if you guys can all stay muted, that'd be great. But since we have like a fairly small amount of participants, I'll probably stop frequently, and then you can just unmute and we can kind of ask any questions or converse on anything you guys need more clarity on. If you guys don't know how to mute, it's going to be on the bottom left hand of the screen. There's a little mic. If you click on it and you see a little red flash, that means you're on mute. If you click on it again and the red flash is not there, that means you're not on mute. And the same thing goes for the video. It's right next to the mute button. Feel free to use the camera and show yourselves. I actually prefer it just because it makes it more interactive on my part, because sometimes it just feels like I'm talking to no one. But if you don't want to share it, I totally understand. Just know that this is being recorded, so anything that you do or say is going to be immortalized, and it's going to be also uploaded to our SELPA website. We haven't figured out how we're going to do that yet, but we are planning to do that soon. The next thing is a chat function, which should be in the bottom center part of your kind of screen. Feel free to kind of utilize that box to ask questions throughout the presentation, to introduce yourself or send me a private message or anything like that. With that said, the chat will also be saved from here. So even if you send me a private message through chat, it's going to be in that kind of dialogue. So just be aware of any questions you may want to ask privately, or if you just want to call me some other time for any questions. I want to thank you guys for participating. We've had a really good turnout from all these trainings, so it's great to see that people are interested in this PDs, and we got a lot of great feedback. So you guys, Brian, either today or tomorrow, he'll be sending out a kind of a form to kind of give us some feedback. If you guys could, that'd be great, because I'm always trying to look for ways to improve, professional development, or kind of find different ways to relay, whatever information I'm sharing more effectively. With that said, does anyone have any initial questions for me? You can put in the chat box or just unmute yourself. Perfect. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. I have a lot of videos intermittently throughout my presentation, and they weren't quite working last week. So I'm going to try again this week. I also downloaded them just in case to give that a try. But if they don't work, I also just inputted the links so we can just watch them on our own.
Bill,
Yeah.
if you make sure when you share screen, there's those two buttons at the bottom before you push share screen to optimize.
Okay,
the sharing.
Okay, thank you for that note. I did see those, and I know I didn't use it last time, so I'm hoping if I use those this time, they will work. So alrighty. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now and make sure I click those two boxes. Hold on. Why is there two open? Where am I at? Optimize, share screen. Okay. So let's get started. So again, today we're going to kind of go over MTSS or multi-tiered system of supports, tier one strategies and supports. My name is Philbert Pandac. I'm a BCBA for Santa Barbara County SELPA. This is my second year going on third. And you may know my counterpart, Rosie Bucio. She's a lot more present in other districts. About 90% of my time is actually spent with Santa Maria Joint Union High School District. So I haven't been that present in those other schools. All right, so what is MTSS? So MTSS is a multi-tiered system of supports, which is a framework which helps effectively provide academic and behavior interventions for students with varied needs by focusing on different staples and aspects. For those of you that have heard the term MTSS before, I know there are different ones. There's social emotional MTSS, which school psychologists and mental health professionals use, and there's also academic MTSS, which a lot of teachers use. So this one is specifically focusing on the behavior MTSS and kind of how to go about implementing different tiers of interventions and how to access support when needed. So one of the focuses of MTSS or behavior MTSS is universal screening of all students early in the school. So this basically is meaning that at the beginning, of each school year, we kind of have a way of screening our students that may potentially need some tiered supports. And after this slide, I'm going to go over one of the universal screenings that I use. And then if you guys have any to share, that'd be great. Next, MTSS focus on tiers of evidence-based interventions that can be amplified in response to level of need. Usually there's 3 tiers, with the first tier being the least invasive, and as you move toward the third tier being more invasive and whatnot. It's also based on ongoing data collection and database decisions. A lot of the time, the reason why actually I decided to do a training on this is because the MTSS procedure isn't utilized frequently, especially when we have like a student who didn't, engage in any behaviors previously and then has a sudden spike of behaviors or have a really dangerous behavior, and we kind of skip through all these kind of MTSS procedures, and that just doesn't allocate our services and the help efficiently. And this way, using the MTSS kind of helps us make sure we don't, step on any toes, and make sure we're kind of effectively utilizing all our sources. Continual assessment, that's basically stating, since there are different tiers, and when we put students in different tiers, we want to continuously assess if that tier is effective, and if not, what can we do? Do we have to move them on to a more invasive tier, or can we adapt or change the interventions up and ideally move them down a tier or take them off the tiers completely? Next is a school-wide approach to expectations and supports. This is basically just kind of relaying that school-wide we need to be on the same page in terms of behaviors and kind of not have different discrepancies on how we respond to behaviors, just to more consistently address them and hopefully not kind of exacerbate behaviors when they do occur. So instead of a waiting for failure model, which is typically applied at MTSS, is a proactive approach. And again, this is usually through the universal screening and the data collection of different tiered interventions that are used. Like I said, I'm gonna go over one of the universal screenings that I use. Before I do that, I do want to also preface the training by saying I tend to speak fairly quickly, naturally. So if I'm talking too quickly, or you guys can understand me, just unmute yourself and let me know or indicate that in the chat box. Okay. So here is the BASI, which is a brief externalizing and internalizing screener for youth. This is one of the universal screenings that I use or provide to teachers in the beginning of the year to kind of get an understanding of what students may need support, whether it be externalizing or internalizing behaviors. It's pretty straightforward. So you just put the kind of logistics here, the student name, that kind of thing, and then it breaks it down again to externalizing the disruptive, aggressive, defiance, and oppositional, and then internalizing behaviors being withdrawn, negative self-talk or negative talk, and emotional problems. And then you would just rate them here. Right here is a rating scale just up top. So 0 is not problematic, 1 is mildly problematic, 2 is moderately, 3 is quite problematic, and 4 is extremely problematic. So let's say you just had 1s across the board, and they would automatically fill in this as 3. But for the internalizing behaviors, let's say you had a little more. You'd have 7 here. So how this lets us identify it is if the score under the externalizing and internalizing is 4 or more, that student is at risk and may possibly need support. So this not only identifies it in terms of the teacher kind of priming themselves, I may need to ask for support if some of the interventions I employ are not working. It also helps make sure that we have a data trail and kind of a paper trail, for that student and their behaviors. If anyone has any other ones that they use, that'd be great. And I can send this out to you guys as a resource. If you guys just put your email and what resource, or send me an email, sorry. Let me put my name on the chat box, actually, my email, just in case. And if you guys want any of the resources, just shoot me an email and let me know which ones. No, you don't have to be trained on this. It gives you directions, straightforward, and it's, yeah. Alrighty. So this is a kind of overview of the behavior MTSS framework. As you can see here on the bottom, we have the tier 1, which is universal interventions for all our students. Tier 1 are school-wide interventions for all learners to prevent behavior challenges. So the tier 1 interventions and strategies that I'm going to go over today should be sufficient in remediating the behaviors for about 80% of our students. And then for those that it doesn't or is not able to kind of help remediate those behaviors, then they would be either in 2 or 3. So tier 2 is specialized interventions for learners who are at risk for academic or social failure due to behavior challenges. And these tier 2 supports can efficiently support about 15% of our students.
You're still on the Bessie slide.
Oh. Thank you for that, sorry. So I'm gonna go again quickly over that. Tier 1, school-wide interventions that should be able to support 80% of our students. Tier 2, specialized interventions that should be efficient for about 15% of our students. And then we have tier 3, which is usually where a behavior specialist or someone else would come in for individualized interventions. And that would serve about 5% of our population. It seems like we're going to be in lockdown, obviously, till the end of this year, or school year, I mean. So I probably will be making a tier 2 professional development. So look out for that, so we can, so you guys can be more familiar with not only the procedures, but the tier 2 interventions as well. All right, so the tier 1 is actually broken down into 3 kind of components. So the first one is school-wide behavioral expectations. The school defines universal behavioral expectations for all students in which all school staff are trained to promote and support. So this is basically those posters you probably see around your school that usually use an acronym. So again, I'm predominantly at Santa Maria Joint Union High School District, and theirs is PRIDE. And I forget what it stands for. Sorry, I forget what it stands for, but it's usually for each letter, it has some kind of behavior or some kind of trait that they want to promote. So they usually have assemblies to kind of go over those behaviors, and they have all the traffic stained on those behaviors as well to help promote them. Next, we have class-wide management. So well-managed classrooms are built on a foundation that includes teaching behavioral expectations to students using proactive strategies to manage group behaviors and building positive relationships with all students. So these are the kind of general classroom management kind of strategies that I already see being employed, but it's kind of a more comprehensive list of of um, interventions that you can kind of refer to when you have some class behaviors. Lastly, we have tier one or classroom interventions. Because teachers are the tier one MTSS first responders, quote unquote, who can potentially assist any struggling student, they should be trained and equipped with resources and guidelines for how to implement tier one behavioral interventions. So for those of you teachers on here, if there are any, hopefully this will help guide you in tier one interventions and how to kind of employ them. And thank you, Jamie, for putting the pride there. So it's prepare, respect, integrity, determination, and encourage. So some of the class interventions that may be included in tier one are these ones here, like behavior expectations, acknowledgement system, good behavior game, that kind of stuff. I'm going to go into depth in them later on, so I'm not going to do that now. Next, we have our tier two interventions. So tier two interventions target students whose needs are at risk, in which tier one supports were not effective, and strategic or specialized interventions are required. So this is basically saying you tried your tier one interventions for 4 weeks or a couple months, and it didn't help reduce the behaviors. They're still present, or if they're getting worse, then they would move on to tier two. And these are some of the interventions that may be utilized in tier two. And again, next month I'll probably be preparing professional development to go over these different interventions. Last, we have tier three interventions. So students needing tier three support are high stake cases that require the MTSS problem solving team, which is usually the case manager, the principal, usually a behavior specialist or someone consulting. And then this team follows a customized problem solving approach that may include an FBA or functional behavior assessment, a BIP, a behavior intervention program plan, individual therapy, wrap services, any more intensive kind of interventions. And as you can see here, I kind of indicated that as you move up onto tiers, the intensity of supports and assessments increases and amplifies. I have a question from Rebecca. So who typically heads up the screening and organizing of MTSS at a site? So typically the teachers will be the ones completing the BASE. And then for those that already have MTSS procedures kind of set up, they would be sent to admin and the behavior specialist. For those of you that are not set up, usually it's just sent to the behavior specialist, and they are the ones that kind of keep track of that to make sure that they can come in when needed and provide any support when needed. I've noticed that a lot of districts don't currently employ the MTSS procedures. Usually what happens is a behavior happens, they assess if a BIP is needed, and they like to apply a behavior intervention plan right away. So that's usually what I see a lot. But ideally, the MTSS procedure would be, utilizing those universal screenings and then sending them to the appropriate people, which would be admin and behavior support or behavior specialist. And the last secret here that I have is staff and student relationships. So an active approach to systematically establish, maintain, and restore positive relationships with all students is employed. The reason why I added this secret tier is because this is pretty critical and a determining factor in terms of the effectiveness of any kind of tier interventions. Is if we don't have, that kind of positive relationship or positive rapport with the student as a base, then it decreases the chance of efficiency like exponentially. So we need to make sure that before we employ any kind of these interventions, especially the more intensive ones, that we have that kind of positive relationship with our students and are actively trying to, establish and maintain them. This is a kind of theme that I'll be kind of alluding to throughout the training. So you'll kind of hear a lot of that. Before we move on, do you have any questions? You can either unmute yourself or in the chat box. Okay. School-wide interventions. So again, we kind of talked about this briefly already. It's those kind of interventions that schools like to promote, like Jamie had stated. So Pride for Santa Maria High, or not Santa Maria High, Santa Maria Joint High School District is Pride. It stands for prepare, respect, integrity, determination, and encourage. So they regularly schedule instruction and assistance and desired social behaviors, and then they create a kind of incentive and motivational system. Usually it's done, what I've seen is kind of like either a form of a token economy. So they have like bucks or bonus bucks or whatever, and they provide them to students when they engage in those behaviors that are stated. And then they turn them in for prizes at the office or whatnot. One of the cool ones that I saw recently was at Orchid Union at Joe Nightingale, I believe theirs is WAVE. Again, I can't remember the specifics of the acronym, but the reason why I thought it was cool is because their posters were not only like in the classrooms, but they were also throughout the whole school. And when they would be out in the school, let's say they're out on the playground or near the bathrooms, something like that, they would kind of amend the different the acronym and their different behaviors that they want to promote into how they can present that behavior in that specific environment. So let's say if one of them was respectful, they would provide how to be respectful, in the bathroom, with washing your hands or whatnot. Rebecca shared the 4 B's, which is great. Be respectful, be responsible, be safe, and be a positive contributor. It's a great one. All right, comes to our first video. I'm hoping it'll play. I did press the buttons. I'm going to try and play it. If not, indicate in the chat, and then we'll try another way if it doesn't work.
You had so much to offer yesterday. You okay?
I'm tired.
So what's going on?
Strong relationships are central to the learning process. What the science of learning and development tells us is that we need to create learning environments which allow for strong long-term relationships for children to become attached to school and to the adults and other children in it.
Can you guys hear the video?
When children have experiences of closeness and consistency and trust, oxytocin is released. Oxytocin has many, many positive effects on the development of the brain. So when we think about a relationship, we're not just talking about being nice to a child. We're talking about a child having an experience of attunement and trust strong enough to release the hormone oxytocin.
Good morning, Ariella. How you doing today?
The purpose of the morning greeting is to connect with them and to just make sure that I'm seeing them as humans. Like I'm making that relationship with them, making that bond.
I prioritize relationship building because getting to know them is the best part of the job.
When I come in the morning, we usually talk about things that are happening in our community.
We're trying to build caring and respect.
The teacher is trying to understand who I am and my values as a person.
When I have a free 45 minutes or an hour, I think to myself, I could sit down and catch up on grading, or I could go and make connections, whether it's a smile or a joke or a reminder. It validates their presence in the building.
Rock it out in the art room. It starts from so much honesty and transparency with kids. It's really easy to strive to be this like idealized, always ready to go elementary school teacher, and that's not real and that's not human. When people start talking about other things while I'm still giving directions, it feels frustrating for me and I have to take a breath. My students connect most with me when they see that I also struggle and I also have challenges. It takes a lot of vulnerability on my part.
Total familiarity.
When that student knows that you care about them, when they know that you're a human,
Let's think about that.
Their academic performance in your class is going to be better.
If I'm comfortable around them, then I'm more confident around them, and it's easier to ask questions and things like that.
So when you're looking at this graph, what is it that you think happened?
Some teachers I don't always get along with the best, so then sometimes I'm like, I can't do it, so I'm just not gonna do it. But when I like the teacher, I want to do their work. I'll be like, I can learn this.
You all have done outstanding work.
Emotion and learning are completely connected. If you're in a positive emotional space, if you feel good about yourself, your teacher, that actually opens up the opportunity for more learning.
Good to see.
Okay. Sorry for pausing it and whatnot. I couldn't hear it, so I thought you guys weren't able to hear it either. So hopefully the next one I can hear. But basically what that is, again, alluding to is that importance of that positive relationship with your students and how much of a difference it can actually make. So moving forward, we're going to go to class-wide management and going over how we can kind of establish and maintain those positive relationships. So all classroom staff should systematically, again, establish a reciprocal personal relationship with the students. Again, this increases the efficiency of any kind of interventions we would utilize in the future. The way I kind of think about it is every positive, interaction we have with our students is a kind of deposits in your kind of rapport relationship, which you can withdraw from later when a behavior occurs or you have to employ an intervention. So here are some ways to establish positive relationships. Some of these I've already gone over in my past training, so it might sound like a broken record, but I'm going to go over them one more time. So interact not only instructionally, but socially with the students as well. We don't want to just pair our relationship with just purely academic. We want to make sure that we pair ourselves with reinforcement and positive social communication, again, to establish that relationship. The 5-to-1 ratio for positive to negative interactions. That's one I've gone over a lot in my past trainings. It's basically saying for every one negative interaction or statement that you kind of relay, you have 5 positive interactions or statements to kind of counterbalance that one negative interaction. The reason why I like to touch on this is because even myself personally, when I get negative feedback, I start to perseverate on it. It's something that just I can't stop thinking about. And without those other, those 5 positive interactions or statements that teachers can provide, our students are probably perseverating on them too. And that's why we want to kind of keep that ratio in our mind to make sure that our students are not going to be hyper-focused on any negative interactions that may occur. Positive interactions can include greetings at the door, smiles, winks, pats on the back, verbal praise. I know this is all pretty straightforward. Even eye contact and saying their name when you say hi can be very powerful. So keeping all those small things in your mind that may be trivial, but really do go a long way. Lastly, we have the 2-to-10 rule, which again, I've mentioned in the past. So for 10 days straight, basically this rule is saying you're going to spend 2 minutes with that student and to interact with them socially outside of academics. So you're going to be talking to them about their interests, and ideally you would let them kind of lead the conversation, or if they're not able to, you facilitating that, but then trying to guide it in terms of their interests and making sure that it's not academic related, again, to establish that positive relationship. Next, for the maintenance of relationships, just like any relationship we have in our lives, it takes a lot of work. So daily direct interaction with each student is a way to maintain that relationship. So that can be seen as greeting at the door, acknowledgments while you're supervising out in different environments, and referencing the student's life. So calling upon those kind of things that they share with you during those, that 2 to 10 rule, when you figure out things about their life, referencing them to make sure that, or to kind of ensure that you heard them and you're able to kind of recall, what they had stated to you before. Next is restoring relationships. So restorative conversations with students after negative interaction to repair any lingering harm to the relationship. So it's impossible to not have negative interactions, especially with students that engage in problem behavior. So making sure that you're actively restoring those relationships every time a negative interaction occurs or behavior occurs, just so you can kind of make sure that they know, that you're going to start over and that it's not lingering on to the next day and serving as antecedent for more future behaviors. So a good way to do that is to validate feelings and to empathize. I have a video that I really like about empathy that I share in my CPI training. It's only a couple minutes, so I'm going to share it now. I may ask if you guys can hear it, because again, on my end, I can't hear it. So just let me know on the chat box or unmute yourself if everything's working.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So the reason why I had that video was to kind of shed light on some other ways to kind of build positive relationships or restore positive relationships. Again, when you empathize, you're kind of taking their perspective and kind of just sitting there with them. Sometimes as teachers or those that serve students, we like to try to control situations by talking a lot and just trying to fix things right away, when sometimes they just need someone there to listen or someone there to kind of be there for them. So that's another way to, again, actively either establish or restore positive relationships with your students. Next, for class-wide management, we have teach behavior expectations. Again, the things I want to go over in terms of class-wide management are things that I look for when I'm called to go into a classroom. I usually have a checklist with things I'm gonna go over right now and after these things, and check if these things are present, and if they're not present, if they were present, would it help remediate the behavior, or would it help fix whatever behaviors are being displayed. So with that said, I'm gonna go over these expectations. So we want to treat behavior as part of the curriculum, meaning we want to teach it and reinforce it. I do see a new wave of this happening, especially with this kind of social emotional curriculum, which is great, which we're going to kind of go over in a little bit. But again, just teaching the behaviors as a part of the curriculum, and making sure that you spend time not only to respond to behavior when it's engaged in, but to talk about it and to teach it when it's not being engaged in. So some things I would look for is to make sure that there are 3 to 5 behavior expectations that are clear and observable that you have for your students in your classroom. I wouldn't recommend more than 3 to 5, just so that you can kind of clearly define and focus on those. When it goes into 6 or more, it can get kind of colluded and really hard to implement. We want to practice these behaviors weekly, if not daily. I find a good time to do it is, before classroom starts, and during major transitions, like after lunch and whatnot. We want to utilize salient visuals. A lot of the classrooms I visit have great visuals, but sometimes they can be, I don't want to say overwhelming, but there's just a lot of visuals. So we want to make sure that the ones that we want to focus on, especially like the class expectations or things that are important, that they are salient and they stand out. Employ priming, so just letting them know before class, what the class expectations are. And again, maybe even priming about, what can be earned if you engage in those behaviors. Model expectations, that's another one that's important. So we want to model whatever these behaviors are, that we want our students to engage in, to make sure that they're seeing us engage in those behaviors as well. For example, if one of them here, like the visual I had is show respect, like talking over, or talking out of turn. We want to make sure that we're not like talking over each other when we're speaking to each other, or screaming at each other, or anything like that. But again, we're just modeling what we want, to be engaged in by the students. A lot of studies have shown that in the home setting, children learn more about behavior and relationships with how their parents treat each other rather than how their parents treat them. So that kind of says a lot in how important it is to make sure that we as adults, when we interact with each other, are modeling what we want to be seen. We want to reinforce frequently and intermittently. You want to reinforce the behaviors that we're kind of setting forth to promote. It can be hard sometimes because, especially with larger classrooms, there's a lot going on. It's hard for you to kind of always reinforce those behaviors because, well, number one, you expect them to behave that, and it's kind of a baseline for most classrooms. But I think if you kind of have some way of tracking them, whether it be on the board or something like that, or other ways of doing it, it might help prompt you to reinforce those behaviors more frequently. Or even it can be even done in different kind of ways. Like it can be paired up with the priming. So when we do priming, let's say it's after lunch and you come in and the students are coming in, you kind of go over the classroom expectations. You tell them, hey, remember, we're going to show respect, raise your hands, blah, blah. And then you provide reinforcement by engaging in social praise. So you would say, before lunch, you guys did a great job with showing respect and sharing, and then giving some examples. That would be another way for you to kind of reinforce. And then use positive framing. So when a student engages in a behavior, we want to turn whatever that behavior is into a positive. So we want to turn our don'ts into do's. So instead of saying if a student is out of their seat a lot, instead of saying don't walk around the classroom, it would turn into please do or please sit in your seats. So again, focusing on what we want them to engage in rather than the don'ts of what we don't want them to engage in. This helps with the 5-to-1 ratio too, because it helps turn negative statements into positive ones. Next, we have procedures and routines. So classroom routines and procedures are thoroughly taught and reviewed. So specific directions, a step-by-step task analysis is provided for directions, especially with our students with accommodations. We want to make sure that they have those accommodations readily available. For example, if they need a printed out or visual of the directions, make sure we have that. Again, that's kind of what I went over. Supplement with visual schedules. Having a predictable schedule. We all know our students thrive with a kind of schedule that they can rely on. And I'm sure that's even proving true now, especially with what's currently going on. A lot of people's schedules have been kind of hectic and they're not able to establish a predictable schedule. And from what I've been hearing from a lot of parents that I'm contacting, that lack of predictability with the schedule has kind of been a trigger for a lot of behaviors in the home. Next, we have pre-planned and smooth transitions. Transitions is a time that, or is a prime time for behaviors. It's usually downtime or time between two activities or whatnot. So I kind of gave a guideline of how to schedule a smooth transition or how to go about having a smooth transition. It's pretty straightforward, and I went over the directions here. So one, I'm gonna go over it quickly. One, you're gonna signal for attention. You may want to pre-establish that signal, whatever it may be. I've seen teachers utilize like choral responding. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, and then the students would say eyes on me. Or it can be some kind of bell or some kind of anything that you can use to signal their attention. Next, you would use in a moment statement. So this signals your students to wait. So during the transition, you would say, in a moment, I want you to X, Y, and Z. Because a lot of our students, if you don't use the term in a moment or wait before I say go, they just start the transition after the first kind of statement that you provide. Give your directions, make sure they're clear and concise. Use your go schedule or your go signal. So when you're ready and you've already given your directions, you go ahead and say go. And then this is where you observe the students, notate any problem behaviors, and then reinforce any successful transitions. When you observe and you notate any problems, then that's what you can, during the next transition, kind of highlight those and focus on those to kind of hopefully have a clearer transition. Most transitions, hopefully, are pre-planned. And I know that, teachers have a lot going on in terms of curriculum and behaviors, so sometimes it's hard to plan a transition and kind of have a step-by-step task analysis for a transition. But if you're observing a lot of behaviors during that time, I would definitely take some time out of your day to kind of structure it in a way that hopefully would be more efficient and display less behaviors. We have a video here. Let me know if you guys can.
I noticed that everyone has hands free and eyes on me. Oh, almost everyone.
Transitions should be clear for every student. Purposeful, respectful, efficient.
That was easy. And thanks for your work over the last 25 minutes of class. I just wanted to check in and see if you had any kind of like technology questions that maybe popped up as you started this work on your graph.
Transitions during lessons work best when they are planned by the teacher ahead of time to move the lesson forward smoothly.
Up
on the board our last protocol for today. There are 5 posters around the room now. When I write lesson plans, I write what it is I'm going to say and what it is I'm going to do during a transition. So if I don't plan transitions before doing them, I might not do them in the most effective way.
Directions should be given in small bites. Materials should be easy to access.
In your own seat sack, you will find a little surprise from me. I disseminated the materials this morning prior to the lesson. My students have seat sacks behind their chairs, so I had tucked away the materials that I had differentiated for them.
Transitions can be practiced regularly by students, rehearsed and critiqued by the class until they are sharp.
Let's try one more time because I want everyone's beautiful eyes on me. And now I see everyone's hands are free and eyes are on me. Much better. It's time to clean up.
Any questions so far? Okay, so moving on to active supervision. So we have walk around, look around, talk around. So we want to walk around, so move continuously around the classroom. This helps us provide some proximity prompts to our students, especially those engaging in noncompliance or that are not engaged in the task that they're supposed to be engaging in. A lot of teachers use the term the floor is lava, so you want to make sure that you're constantly moving and not at one spot for too long. You want to look around, so scan continuously and overtly, making sure that students know that you are paying attention and that you're present. You want to talk around, you want to interact positively and frequently with your students. Here I noted that active supervision increases the opportunities for positive social interactions exponentially. So when you're walking around, it kind of gives you, like I just said, more opportunities to engage with your students proactively and positively. So if you're sitting down on a desk, even though I know that sometimes it's not feasible to be walking around throughout the whole entire day, number one, it's tiring, and number two, it's just not feasible in terms of most classrooms. But finding out time, especially during instruction, to make sure you're moving continuously will help provide more opportunities for you to engage with your students on a one-on-one setting when providing large group instruction. You want to positively reinforce appropriate behaviors, design the classroom to minimize crowding, and minimize distractions to allow students to work quietly. So these 3 are pretty straightforward, but again, it's just that checklist that I usually have when I go into a classroom. And again, hopefully you guys can use this as a tool to kind of look back on if you do see some behaviors and see if, if some of these strategies, even though they may be straightforward, having a list kind of helps to make sure to see if, these simple strategies can help whatever behavior is being observed. I'm gonna skip this video actually. All right. Next we have engagement and opportunities to respond. So instruction actively engages students in observable ways. So it has to pass the dead man's test. The dead man's test is if a dead person or a dead man could be good in your classroom or would be able to pass your classroom's expectations, that means that you're not engaging the class and you're not providing enough opportunities to respond. So you want to actively engage them in meaningful ways to make sure they want to participate either by raising their hand, answering a question, or even helping out a peer. Students are provided with multiple opportunities to respond. One way to do that is to solicitate random responses. So a lot of our students will learn that, if they don't raise their hand, then they won't be called on. So this is a good way to kind of get around the classroom to make sure everyone's called on and kind of get that sense that they're included in the classroom. I've seen that a lot with just basic kind of sticks that with their names on it, you just pick one and ask the students, or just through a roster list or your attendance list and going through and randomly picking those out. I use various cueing techniques such as corresponding, signaling, and peer-based. I kind of went over one of these earlier, the 1, 2, 3, eyes on me. There are several strategies out there for you to signal your students when you want them to either get their attention, for them to be quiet. I've seen a mirroring signal. So the teacher would go like this, I believe, whenever they wanted their students to mirror whatever she was doing, to kind of give them that different output to help them learn. If you guys have different or other signaling or cueing kind of techniques that you guys use and want to share them, you can unmute yourselves or share them in the chat room. That'd be great. Again, I'm not a teacher, so I don't have a lot of these techniques, so that'd be great if you guys could share. I stated here, providing opportunities to respond for all students creates an environment where students can feel like they belong. Again, alluding to what I said earlier, if students don't raise their hands, a lot of the times they fly under the radar and they don't get that connection with the teacher during instruction. So class-wide management. Systems are in place to acknowledge positive behavior. We talked about one of the systems, the school-wide one before, which was the bonus bucks, which they would be provided when students engage in those school-wide behavior expectations. This is focusing on class-wide. So there are different kind of supports you can use. There's Classroom Dojo, clip charts, token economies, bonus bucks, verbal praise. And the one I want to highlight is the clip charts. And the reason why I want to highlight it is because I know that they can be effective, but in hindsight, when I see them being used, or if I'm even pulling from my own experience, I know that it can be somewhat, I don't want to say traumatic, but it can be somewhat stigmatizing. I just remember when I was in kindergarten, and then I would get my card pulled, and the card pull would be like green, you're doing good, yellow, not so good, and red is bad. And I would just be so embarrassed and kind of discouraged every time I had to pull my card. That's kind of the same idea with the clip chart, especially if it's shown, throughout the whole class and you're going down the clip chart, it can be somewhat stigmatizing and somewhat discouraging. So I encourage teachers to kind of use one that isn't so discouraging. Acknowledge whole class and individual efforts and specific feedback. So whenever we do provide feedback, we want to make sure it's tied back to the expectations and the specific behaviors that we prime them to use. So we want to make sure that everything that we say has its meaning, basically. So if you see them raising their hand, you want to say, hey, Michael, thank you for raising your hand. You did a great job being respectful. Making sure, again, that we're naming what the behaviors are, so hopefully we can increase them in the future. And we also want to discourage inappropriate behaviors, but we want to do so in a way that's not aggressive, I would say. So I set out some rules that are some steps that may help you. So step one, if you observe a behavior, you would state the behavior expectation and set up a contingency for reinforcement. So for example, I would say, I need you to sit in your desk and complete your work. Then you will be able to earn your iPad or whatever that student is working for. Step two, before the next prompt, you would walk away and wait a few minutes before approaching them again. Again, this kind of alludes back to what I said earlier. Sometimes you want to fix things right there and then, and we'll kind of set a boundary, or we'll give a directive. We'll kind of stand there and wait until they begin. The reason why I want to avoid that is because students will usually match your behavior. So if you're there being somewhat intimidating, making sure that they comply, they're just going to throw the gauntlet down and be like, screw it, I'm not going to do anything at all. So giving them space and a few minutes to kind of process what you said and to give them this the opportunity to spontaneously engage in what you directed them to do. So the behavior continues. After you walk away, approach the student again and respectfully restate the expectation with a reasonable consequence. For example, I ask you to sit in your desk and complete your work. If you continue to be off task, I will have to move your seat. When you present the consequence, it should be reasonable to whatever the behavior is, and it should also be enforceable. So if you know you can't move your seat, you're gonna have a hard time moving him, and he's gonna engage in behavior, then I wouldn't use that. I would do something that would be enforceable. So it would be, maybe, let's see, I ask you to sit in your desk and complete your work. If you continue to be off task, you will not earn your iPad, because that's something you can't control because it's mediated and you have the iPad. So making sure that whatever you're stating is enforceable. Step 3, if the student follows your directive, provide them with immediate positive verbal praise. And if the student is not receptive, then you go ahead and follow through with that consequence. So Rebecca shared, another good rule for positive behavior support is praise publicly and correct privately. Maybe why Clipchart isn't best, which is a great point. You want to praise publicly because it helps them get that not only that kind of reinforcement from you, but usually it influences the students to kind of look at that student in a manner and kind of give them that praise in that way. And correcting privately, which is great, making sure you're not singling out a student and everyone's kind of listening in while you're kind of providing corrective feedback. That's great. Thank you for sharing, Rebecca. Next, we're going to move on to classroom interventions. So these are interventions that, once you've determined that there is problem behavior that may require some additional support rather other than the class-wide expectations, then this is where you would use these different interventions. And the first one is breaks. So provide frequent breaks, not contingently throughout the day, to help deter escape and avoidance, maintain behaviors such as elopement and noncompliance. And there are several ways to take a break. There is moving position in class or alternative seating in their own space. You can have the students go on an errand to the office. You can have a snack break. You can have a social break, laugh break, a mindfulness break. I notated mindfulness break just because we use that a lot in our TLP programs, which is a therapeutic learning program. And we work a lot on mindfulness. So we'll set a timer, usually 2 to 3 times a day, and it'll be super random. And the timer will just go off, and then we'll engage in a mindfulness break. Usually it has to do with your senses and kind of just being in tune with your emotions and what you're feeling at that current time. If you guys want to share some breaks that you guys used or some mindfulness breaks, that'd be great. If you want to share them in the chat box or just unmute yourselves. We can kind of be resources for each other. Note that I put here, actively engaging with students during breaks provides an opportunity to engage in non-academic topics and connect personally. So a lot of the times we'll have a break for the students. We'll be like, okay, we're gonna take a 5 minutes break where you can chat with your peers or do XYZ. This is a great opportunity for you to engage with them because it's not academic based, and you can kind of, again, talk with them on a different level that's not focusing on academics. So kind of taking that into consideration and kind of making sure you take advantage of those times. Because I know sometimes it can be hard to schedule time to build rapport with students, especially with a bigger classroom and a lot of behaviors. I have video here.
Hello. Hello. I found so much content when I clicked on that. Okay. Voice is off in 1. Voice is off right now.
I don't know how they do it. They go from one class to a passing period, then back to another class with a completely different subject.
You go through the day without feeling how you feel. You just wake up, do your morning routine, go to school, come back home, and you don't stop, And with mindfulness, you do stop.
Mindful body, feet are flat on the floor. Become aware of your body. So just notice your body. Mindful Minute usually happens at the start of class. What I'm trying to do is give them a chance to arrive, is to give them a chance to make it all the way into the room with their bodies and their awareness. I'm going to turn off my voice and let you breathe for a couple of minutes without my voice.
She tells us to listen to our breathing and recognize the fact that you are breathing. Letting you stop for a minute, just reflect on yourself and how you feel.
when I was really stressing and worrying about stuff. When I took these mindful minutes, it's like, I'm gonna be fine. Like, I'm gonna get through this.
It's a very easy, very simple way to help kids arrive, to quiet down their nervous systems and help the brain turn on and get learning ready.
The reason why I added that was especially I found myself kind of doing this or engaging in mindfulness breaks, especially between meetings. For example, today I had 3 IEPs, this profession and this PD, so I had to kind of take time in between to kind of center myself, and kind of go back down to baseline. So we want to make sure that we provide the opportunity for our students to kind of engage in those breaks to kind of hopefully center them, especially for our junior high and high school students that go into different environments and are exposed to a lot of triggers. Next, we have praise, and praise goes a long way. Provide frequent praise verbally and physically, non-contingently and contingently throughout the day to help promote the engagement of positive pro-social behaviors. So one way to do it that's very popular is the good behavior game. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, but those of you that are not, I'm going to go over it fairly quickly. So the good behavior game, So the good behavior game is basically you split your classroom anywhere from 2 to 4 groups. You would have 2 or 3, behaviors that are the target behaviors that you want them to engage in it. And then you would kind of set a time interval, let's say 5 or 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, you'd be like, okay, who won the points or good behavior points? And whoever kind of embodied whatever or engaged in the behaviors that you set forth in the beginning would get that point. And the group, whoever gets the most points, obviously at the end, gets a predetermined reinforcer. And it actually doesn't have to be predetermined. It can actually be a surprise too. You know what I mean? You can kind of just rotate surprise reinforcers. It's kind of individualizing to your classroom. And there's different kind of caveats to that game. There's different ways to implement it, but that's the most basic one. So we want to praise when we're cooperative and well behaved. Praise when good attitude and involvement occur. Praise when on task. Praise when engaging in replacement behaviors. Basically, just praise everything. Any positive thing that you see, if you have the time, praise it. Again, this number 1 helps us with the 5-to-1 ratio, making sure that they're getting those positive statements. And 2, it kind of it gives students a sense of accomplishment, and it kind of helps motivate them to either remain engaged in that behavior or to do even better the next time, or even to do better on different behaviors. So making sure that we are being mindful of how we praise our students. And I put here 100 ways to praise a child, because there's a lot. I know that sometimes we can kind of get stuck in, good job, or that was great. These are just the kind of general ways you can say or praise your child when engaging in behaviors that you want to be observed. I think I have a video after this as well.
A moment ago, we made this volunteer believe she sunk a pair of blindfolded free throws, when earlier, with no blindfold, she missed 10 in a row. How will she do her second time at the line, now that she thinks she nailed those blindfolded buckets?
Oh, close! So close, so close. That's number 1. All right, keep it going, keep it going. Oh!
She's definitely getting closer, but no baskets yet.
You got this, you got this, you got this. Oh, you.
Wow. By making her think she sank those blindfolded shots, and by cheering and giving her positive reinforcement, it's almost like we hacked her self-confidence and got her to believe more in her natural abilities. In fact, out of 10 shots this time around, she ended up making 4. Quite an improvement. But what if one of our volunteers was already good at basketball? Whoa, this guy's got game. He made a whopping 9 shots from the line. Think there's anything we could do to make him worse?
Okay, so let's have you take 1 shot, all right? You think you can do it, guys? All right, Josh, let's give it a shot. 3, 2, 1. Not quite, but it's all right. Let's let him try a second time. It's a tough one. All right. Wow. Let's give it a shot, Josh. All right. All right. Well, look, the man is blind. Okay. Let's go ahead and take off the blindfold. So listen, it wasn't as easy as we thought, but let's have you do your 10 throws again without the blindfold. Okay. Just do your thing. 9 out of 10, maybe 10 out of 10. Okay. All right, let's see. You guys got his A game on? Come on, Josh. Whoa. All right, Josh. You got this, man. You got this. All right, that's 2.
Remember, this guy made 9 free throws earlier, but now it looks like the crowd's negative reinforcement is throwing him off his game.
So I wanted to play that video just to kind of illustrate how powerful praise can be. And another reason why I wanted to highlight that is because even from personal experience, we want to change the internal narrative that students have, and by providing frequent praise, it kind of helps change that internal narrative. Not to blame my parents, but I didn't get a lot of praise as a child. It was basically you have to succeed. If you don't, you're not good enough. So that's why it's kind of transformed me into whenever I always say sorry. Whenever I get a compliment from someone or I get praise, I don't know how to act, or I get really awkward just because I was never exposed to that, and it was just really weird for me. So we want to make sure at an early age that we're kind of changing that internal narrative that they are, good enough, and we're praising, and that we are seeing them and the good behaviors that they engage in. The last thing I wanted to touch upon was there was a study done. I forget her name. I think it was Dweck. She was a school psychologist. And when we provide praise, we want to make sure that it's effort focused and not intelligence focused. Because intelligence is it's a solid trait. And when we praise intelligence, there you go, Carol Dweck, perfect, thank you. It kind of sets a precedent that if they don't do good, if they're not smart, or if they don't get a high grade, then we don't, we're not praising them, or then they're not good enough. So we want to praise the effort, saying that they tried really hard. And the study that she did was, I think she had over 400 students, and then she divided them in half. And each of the students, they got a really easy IQ test. And one of the groups were praised for their intelligence. They said, hey, you're really smart, you got a good grade, you must be really smart, or something along those lines. And the other half was praised for the effort. It would be like, great job, you tried really hard, you did great. And then after that, they presented each of the cohorts with the option to either take a harder IQ test or an easier IQ test. And what was interesting was the ones that were praised on intelligence, about 67% of them chose the easier one, because they thought, if I choose the hard one, I might not get a good grade, or I might not do well, and I'm not going to get that praise, or I'm not going to get that kind of, attention from whoever's providing it. But those in the other group that were presented with, praise for effort, I think it was, I can't remember the number, I think it was over 90% chose the more difficult ones, a more difficult test. So that just kind of shows you, it gives them motivation, and it's, yeah, again, Jamie, thanks for mentioning that. So it provides and encourages the growth mindset, which a lot of our TLP programs, not all our TLP programs, but a lot of our schools are trying to utilize. Next, If you don't have any questions, we're going to go over reinforcements. I'm going to go over this fairly quickly because a lot of them are straightforward. So we want reward systems and incentives. Again, we talked about this earlier, token economy, star charts, etc. These are kind of basic way to create a reward system. So you would identify reinforcements, whether it's a preference assessment or reinforcement menu. You can have students, write in on a card 3 things they may want to earn, and then using those, and then see what's feasible, and then creating a reinforcement menu, and then having the students choose what they want to earn. The reason why I wanted to highlight that initially is because a lot of the times we don't do these continuously. Usually we'll have a student that, let's say, likes to work for iPad, and we'll kind of just stick with iPad, and we're not using preference assessments. So we want to make sure we use them to make sure that whatever we're using is actually reinforcing to them, and that we're continuously making sure we're using the highest reinforcement possible. We want to identify the target behaviors. They can be general for the whole class, or they can individualize for the students. We're going to determine how you want to track the behavior, whether it be on a desk, online, or whatever. Define a criteria for reinforcement, making sure the students know also what the criteria is and how they reach that criteria, and then reinforcing the behavior when it is displayed. Other methods of reinforcement in the classroom is a note or call home. I like to notate this because usually when you think of a note or call home, it's for a bad behavior. You would be like, Dylan engaged in aggression, X, Y, and Z. So a positive note or call home is really beneficial, or can be efficient as well. So making sure that not only is he getting the praise from school, but the parents at home are also continuing that praise when they get that note and that call home. Next, the class pass. So let's say they reach reinforcement. A class pass would basically give them a pass for a certain amount of time to do some self-directed leisure activities and not having to engage in instruction for a certain amount of time. Another thing we have is special privileges. In our TLP classes, we have honors, we call honors. I believe it's usually 2 times a week at the end of the day. And if they earn a certain criteria, they get to go into the honors room. And the honors room would usually entail like video games, snacks, and different other things like that. But I've seen it used in other classrooms as well. And at the end of the day, depending on how you did, you would earn free time or earn special privileges. Rebecca notated, only give attention to the behaviors we want to see increase in frequency or intensity. That's a great note. Yeah, we definitely want to focus on those. A lot of the old kind of mindset was to just reduce the behaviors, reduce the problem behaviors. So we were hyper focused on, on responding or reacting to those behaviors rather than responding appropriately and providing praise and reinforcement for the positive behaviors. So we want to make sure we keep that in mind. Adapting academics. Again, I'm going to go fairly quickly over this, and I also have a video of a teacher who does a great job adapting her instruction. So we want to adapt the instructions such that the student has the prerequisite skills to effectively participate and complete presented tasks and increase the likelihood of task initiation and sustained engagement. So basically what this is saying, we want to make sure that the student that doesn't present a kind of skill deficit that would be a determining factor in engagement. We want to make sure that whatever we're presenting, or the academics or curriculum that we're presenting, is at his grade level, at his ability level, and is presented in a way that it will increase the likelihood of initiating that task. And ways we can do that is we can provide alternative modes of completing assignments. It could be, on the computer, it can be verbal, whatever that might be. We provide alternative choices to assignments, reduce assignments or break down the assignments, or otherwise known as task reduction. Help the student start the assignments, another form of task reduction. Break down the directions, clear and concise. A lot of the times, especially with the longer, more complex directions, if it has more than one, it would be great to just provide a kind of visual task analysis of each direction so the student can kind of reference it when they get lost. Have students repeat back the directions to you. That's a great one to make sure that they were listening to what the directive was and it's again providing another way for you to provide direction and kind of let them process it by letting them say it to you. The last one's pretty, again, straightforward. Provide visuals for directions. Actually, I thought I said that before. There are other ways to kind of adapt your academics or your curriculum. And again, if you want to share them in the chat or unmute yourself, feel free to. I want to show this video. Again, this teacher did a really good job adapting her curriculum for her classroom.
Today's lesson was a 3rd grade lesson from Module 1. We engaged in a close read lesson using the text Waiting for a Biblio Burrow. Her only book! Differentiation is really important to the students in my class. So as a critical thinker, I'm compelled to adjust the lessons to meet the needs of my students. Some ways I differentiate in the classroom are chunking text, adding sentence starters to support students with their writing. All students bring a different level of readiness to the tasks that they have to complete. So when I'm preparing to teach a lesson, I consider 3 things. 1, the data I have on my students. 2, my menu of options for differentiation. And 3, the structure of the lesson plan I have at hand. And then I take those 3 components and weave them together to design a differentiated lesson. First target says, when I start the whole group lesson, I start by unpacking the learning targets with students, reading the learning target aloud and making sure the students are clear on the vocabulary used in the target, and also giving the students some protocol to self-assess where they are in those targets. Show me where you feel you are on that target. Are you a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1? Great, hands down. And once I do that, then we work through the close read process. On a hill behind a tree, there's a house. We take it step by step. First, we close read for enjoyment. I just read the text out loud and ask the students to enjoy the story. So he took her book on his donkey to bring it to other kids. Isn't that cool? In your own seat sack, you will find a little surprise from me. I disseminated the materials this morning prior to the lesson. My students have seat sacks behind their chairs, so I had tucked away the materials that I had differentiated for them. Disseminating the materials in this way allows for students not to feel singled out. In the next part of our lesson, I bring the students through annotating the text in the close read process. So in this particular case, the annotating or the text coding was the underlining of important information and circling the unfamiliar words.
I underline libraries and books.
In order to have my classroom more student-centered, I balance teacher talk and student talk. And I chose after each work period to have them pair and share their work and make corrections that way. And I allow them to check in with each other or myself in regards to that work.
Because you're a good reader, could you read it to them? And then after he's done reading it, could you give him a suggestion on what he should write right there?
I strategically paired the students on a similar reading level, but even though they're on a similar reading level, they brought a different subset of skills. I knew that one student may bring a wealth of vocabulary knowledge, while the other student brought a comprehension element. And by pairing them like this, they're able to reach a deeper understanding within the text. About half of the class is identified with special needs, and I have a co-teacher to provide additional support to small groups as needed. Another way I differentiate is chunking text. I may give one student 1 paragraph and another student 2. The students who receive 1 paragraph are able to feel like they can complete the process without feeling intimidated or frustrated, while those who feel more confident may get 2 paragraphs so they're able to complete the task and feel the challenge and not get bored during the lesson. Being aware of the pacing and the reading level that they're at, it's just giving students a different amount, but I'm not changing the complexity of the text. The great thing about the modules is that the lesson plans and student work and student text are already prepared. So my planning time is spent preparing the differentiated materials for the students, and I'm not spending my time preparing those other pieces that I used to spend my time preparing. Once we complete the annotation of the text with the circling and the underlining, we ask the students to do the 3rd close read independently of their excerpt, and then after they do that, to mark the gist on the side of their excerpt that best matches their chunk of text.
Sean, how would you explain a gist in your own words?
What the text talks about a lot.
The gist is the first draft of thinking about the text. What's the text mostly about?
All right, we're on the 4th part of the close read,
which is answering text-based questions. Then I guide the students to take all of that work that they've put into the text, that deep learning, and apply it to answering text-based questions. I provide different recording forms. Some recording forms offer more support, including sentence starters, and some of the recording forms offer less support, and they are minus the sentence starters. So another way I was able to differentiate is instead of modeling for the whole class and taking away time when other kids were ready to move on, I made sure I set the class and then moved to the students who would need the extra examples, touched base with them first, and then was able to monitor the rest of the class.
Exit ticket. You need to pick one question and write the answer for me on this card.
So in this case, I wanted an exit ticket as my ending assessment instead of a whole group discussion. I find with whole group discussion, I'm not sure I heard from every student. And with an exit ticket, I do get a piece of work from every student. Differentiation done well is short term for the children, so that by the time they complete the academic year, they don't need the same differentiation and scaffolding that they did at the beginning. I absolutely see results. Kids have the supports during the lesson that they need to complete the work, regardless of their readiness.
So at night
Students who normally feel frustrated, intimidated, overwhelmed, or lack confidence are able to feel empowered, engaged, because they know that the support is there for them to be able to finish. We all have the same text, we all have the same target, but we achieve the target by different means. And that's what differentiation does for the students during the lesson. Provides a different pathway to get to the same target.
And they were happy because now they were reading and they can read more better.
So I just want to highlight, different ways you can do it. Again, if you want to share some strategies, that'd be great. I know from my experience in being a behavior support aide and working closely with teachers, or even now working closely with teachers, I know how difficult it could be to adapt your curriculum for everyone and for every subject for the whole entire day. So starting small would be my best advice to you, and kind of starting off where you can. But it really does help deter a lot of the escape, maintain behaviors when our students have that kind of skill acquisition deficit. Next, we have organization for our classroom interventions to provide tools and employ strategies to help establish and maintain organizational skills. These are pretty straightforward. So create structured routine for the students, color-coded folders, which I have a picture of here. So basically you would have different folders for different subjects, and then you would color code them by folders, and then to supplement that, you would have maybe a sticker or a mark on on the different kind of subjects. So if you had math, you would have a red folder for math, and then for all the math assignments, you'd have a red mark or a red sticker to help them organize that. You would establish specific areas for different belongings and assignments. This doesn't only help with organization, but it also helps the student feel a sense of being a part of the class. So that's a great tool there. Checklist, of course. Even me personally, I find it satisfying to check something off a list. So having a checklist of things they need to do, and then having a student check it off. Having a daily planner, pretty straightforward. A master calendar, that basically entails a calendar that you have posted up in your room or wherever feasible, where the student can refer to for different kind of dates and different upcoming assignments or whatnot. You would exercise organizing materials daily. So kind of like our behaviors where we want to teach and practice them, it's the same with organization skills. We want to set aside time to actively work on them, actively provide ways to present these different kind of strategies, and then again, actively reinforce them when we see them using those strategies. A couple more is the weekly cleanup or weekly backpack audits. So again, pretty straightforward. Weekly cleanup would entail, at the end of Friday, you would clean out the backpacks with any spare papers or whatnot. And backpack audits could be like having some standards for the backpack to look at, or to be looking like. So it would be like, all your papers are in your folder, your pencils are in the pencil pouch, and all your homework is, turned in and not in your backpack. And then you would just check their backpacks and then basically give them an audit and then reinforce accordingly and provide feedback accordingly. This is one of those things that sometimes gets swept under the rug because it could be a kind of determining variable in terms of like grades or non-compliance, or it seems like it's non-compliance, but in reality it's just a lack of organizational skills. So making sure you're focused on, is it a compliance thing or is it a lack of organizational skills? And then addressing it whichever is appropriate. We have stimulation and sensory. Actively provide self-stimulation and sensory accommodations that are accessible, especially for our students under the autism spectrum disorder, making sure that they're provided with these sensory and self-stimulatory kind of activities, and making sure that if they do need to access them, that they can. And for those of you that are not familiar with self-stimulatory behavior basically, I would categorize it in kind of two functions. So each human or each person, we have our baseline or our homeostasis. And if we are understimulated, we will engage in behaviors that will hopefully bring us up to homeostasis. Or if we're overstimulated, we'll engage in behaviors that will hopefully bring us down to homeostasis. So these are things that hopefully can help remediate those in the classroom. We have standing while working, especially those that have a hard time like sitting down for long periods of time. This is a great easy way to kind of help that. Having a yoga ball, this helps with that sensory input, and it also gives them a not activity, but a kind of sensory kind of feeling while they're bouncing on it while they're working on their assignments. Sensory toys and fidgets, which have been increasingly more popular. But make sure obviously it's individualized, because not all students, I've found that if anything, about 50% of the time they're counterproductive and they're just focused on the fidgets rather than actually working and helping them focus. So making sure that it is effective for you to use. Olfactory sensory breaks, vestibular sensory breaks. Vestibular sensory breaks are like going on a swing, jumping on a trampoline, that kind of stuff. And of course the olfactory breaks would be like using the, what's it called? I can't remember, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's not an air purifier, air diffuser or whatever, or different scents to help them, you know, address whatever that sensory need is. Yeah, there you go, more aromatherapy diffuser. I had a student who was hyper focused on the smell of coins for some reason, and he would just pick up coins and smell them. And so it was really bizarre, and we found a replacement. He really also liked the scent of oranges. So what we did is we just had one of those essential oils for the oranges, and we put it on a stick. And instead of picking up coins from the ground and smelling it, and if he needed to, he would just grab that stick and smell the essential oil of orange. Sensory stations or corner. Obviously, sometimes it's not always feasible to have these out and about. And sometimes they can be counterproductive if they're too readily available, and the students will just go and play in them instead of using them for their actual purposes. So having a station or corner can help with that. And then also a sensory menu that kind of supplements the corner, so they can have a visual of what's available for them to use if they need to use it. Rebecca stated that these organization strategies are especially helpful for students with executive functioning needs. Yep, exactly. So the executive functioning, one of the staples is the kind of organizational skills. So you're absolutely right. And yes, aromatherapy diffuser is what I was talking about. We actually didn't have aromatherapy for that student I was talking about. We just ended up using a stick, but that would be obviously a more effective way to use it. We have a video of a sensory room. It's 3:03 right now. I think I'm going to skip it for time's sake, but maybe if you have time at the end, we can go back. Next, for classroom interventions, we have redirection. So redirect their problem behavior with varying methods and techniques. And what I want to make sure is when you're employing redirection, it is not synonymous with negative feedback. So when a student is engaging in a behavior and say, stop doing that, or that's not right, that is not a form of redirection. That's a form of social disapproval. So we want to make sure that we're differentiating those two. some ways we can provide redirection is proximity, which we talked about earlier. A good way to do what we talked about earlier was, continuously walking throughout the classroom. We can have the nonverbal cues, which we talked about earlier. It can be like a bell or some sort to kind of get attention, or something like that, or just even shrugging or pointing to what you want them to do. It can be physical prompts, such as tapping them on the shoulder or physically redirecting them into the area they need to be. It can be as simple as eye contact. Kind of like with my parents, that's my parents' form of redirection, is they would just look at me and I would automatically know what, I'm doing something wrong and I need to be doing something else. A talk ticket is a popular one. I gave an example here as a visual. So a talk ticket would basically, this is used a lot when students talk out of turn or talk during a lesson. So you would have these kind of readily available, and you would write out, who they get to talk with, so that this ticket entails blank the student's name to a conversation with blank, either the teacher or a paraprofessional or someone else that's predetermined, and the conversation will take place on date and time and location. So this kind of helps redirect that student to hold whatever they're thinking about and talk about it later. And it also helps you not to have to verbally kind of say, we're not going to talk about that right now. You just have them talk ticket, and then they can use that at that time that's specified. Speak with a student privately. I think it was Rebecca that noted that. So when you redirect, again, talking with them privately to make sure that you're reserving their dignity and not kind of openly talking about their behaviors in front of everyone else. Review behavior expectations. We talked about that already. And then another one I've seen used is you would redirect them to a social story and role playing. So let's say a student is engaging in inappropriate touching, trying to like hug maybe another student that's inappropriate. So you would redirect them to the social story which would in detail kind of talk about appropriate touch and how you engage in that appropriate touch with your peers or your teachers. It's important to note to utilize a calm and neutral tone when utilizing redirection, because we want to make sure that the student doesn't perceive this as a kind of punishment or some kind of negative statement. We're simply redirecting their behavior to what they should be doing. And again, shouldn't be perceived as an aversive kind of statement or aversive kind of interaction. Teach. So identify any deficits or skill acquisition goals and teach them accordingly. Whenever a student engages in a behavior, we have to teach them an appropriate way to engage in, an appropriate behavior to engage in to receive what they're receiving before. So let's say if a student was engaging in property destruction to access something, we want to teach them a way that they can access items without engaging in property destruction, which would usually be requesting verbally, requesting through a picture exchange communication system, or requesting in a different way. We also want to teach, I kind of wrote them down here. So we want to, again, identify what the issue is and teach them the corresponding skills. So they could be conflict resolution, coping skills, organizational skills, relationship skills, relaxation skills, social skills, etc. And this usually can be addressed by the social emotional curriculum, which I kind of touched upon earlier. And I have a quick video, I think, after this, which will kind of go over that for those of you not familiar. But whenever we have a skill and we do have the curriculum ourselves and we're able to kind of instruct the students, this is a quick way for us to do that. So we would, number one, instruct the student on what we're instructing, whether it be raising their hand, asking for a break, whatever it is. We would do some modeling, meaning we would engage in that behavior and model it for them. We would have them rehearse, so have them practice it and provide positive feedback for rehearsing. And then on top of that, in vivo, so when we have opportunities in real life or like in the classroom setting that's outside of this training, we would identify the opportunity. We would be like, hey, this is a great opportunity for the student to engage in the skill we just practiced, which is raising hand. So you would cue the student to engage in that behavior and then reinforce them immediately if they engage in that behavior. A lot of times, especially with a conflict resolution organizational skills, relationship skills, those can be better addressed with a more robust kind of social emotional curriculum. And it may be the next slide. I'm gonna kind of go over some different social emotional curriculum resources that you can access to get those. So yeah, if you guys are not familiar with social emotional curriculum, I'm gonna play this video quickly. It's I think 2 or 3 minutes. It kind of goes over what it is.
There's a lot of talk these days about SEL, social emotional learning. But what exactly is it? Social emotional learning is the process of learning social and emotional skills, and it's just as important as learning reading or math. This learning process is most effective when it begins early and continues through high school. Social emotional skills are essential for success in school, work, and life. With SEL, students learn to manage their own emotions and behaviors, have empathy and show care and concern for others, solve problems effectively, make responsible decisions, and maintain healthy relationships. Students learn to recognize what's happening inside them and to be aware of their emotions, which helps them deal with strong emotions and impulsive behaviors. It helps them stop, take a breath, and think about a situation before acting. Students learn to identify others' emotions and perspectives, which helps them empathize and show compassion, no matter who they are or what their background is. It's not difficult to imagine how this is important in the classroom and in life. Students learn to solve problems in peaceful ways and communicate assertively about what they need or want. This helps them get along with other students and get the help they need from adults. When students learn to make responsible decisions about their lives and their future, things can turn out better. Research shows social emotional learning makes a difference. Students who participate in SEL do better academically, have improved attitudes and behaviors, and act in delinquent or disruptive ways less often. In the United States, students with strong social emotional competence are twice as likely to earn a college degree and nearly 50% more likely to graduate from high school and have a full-time job by age 25. Just as important, students who are socially and emotionally competent have more friends. This means they're more likely to feel connected to school and do well, and less likely to be left out or bullied. Simply put, by participating in social emotional learning, students learn the skills to succeed in every facet of school and the rest of their lives.
Alrighty, so that was kind of a quick overview of social emotional curriculum. Like I said, that is sitting here is one of the most prominent ones I've seen lined up in some of the schools. And hopefully we have some time. I'm going to go over some resources to kind of look at how to locate or identify different social emotional curriculums or social emotional learning curriculum. So the last one we have is consequences, or I believe is the last one. So the reason why I put it as the last is because, again, this is usually done as a last resort if all the other interventions don't work and we have to provide a consequence. And these are some that are empirically validated and have resources to access. So when employing consequences, you want to, again, like redirection, utilize a neutral tone, stay unbiased, and empathize. Additionally, want to make sure the consequences are clear, reasonable, and enforceable, kind of like what we talked about earlier. These are ones that, again, we see a lot prominently in a lot of the schools. There's a call a parent or a note home, do unfinished work during recess, an office referral, reflection sheets to kind of talk over what the behavior was, take away privileges. So that's the opposite side of the spectrum of earning extra privileges. So if they don't earn the criteria, their privileges would be taken away instead of earning extra ones. And then take away unstructured or free time, which is pretty much the same thing. So these negative consequences are not likely to be effective in the long run if there's not a positive foundational relationship between teacher and student. So if you don't have that positive relationship with your student, like I've been trying to highlight throughout this training, these are more likely than not going to work. Because what's going to happen is they're going to have a perception is that you're basically just like an enforcer of these bad consequences, and there's no positive relationship for them to kind of fall back on. So we want to make sure again that if you provide consequences, it's after that rapport and that relationship has already been established. I have a couple visuals here. So when we are engaging in these consequences or applying them, we want to avoid power struggles. So not picking up the rope, we want to be very, matter of fact and saying, this is the consequence if you don't do this, and then following through with that consequence if it continues, and not kind of going in that back and forth kind of verbal argument with the student, because that can just kind of exacerbate the situation and trigger more serious behaviors. The other one I have is after a consequence is provided, and after you've used one of these, like a call home or office referral, we want to engage in these three things to make sure that that relationship is restored. We want to reconnect with the students, after the consequence, repair any feelings that are lingering, and then restore the relationship by, admitting any of your own faults that may have occurred, saying sorry if you need to, if that pertains, and then also figuring out different ways that the student could have reacted in terms of behavior and how to avoid these kind of consequences in the future. Well, I don't know why I exited. I'm going to skip this next video as well for time's sake. I'm going to go into applying or creating a Tier 1 intervention plan. So when we're creating a Tier 1 intervention plan, which is the interventions that I've touched upon briefly, you want to identify the problem behavior or problem behaviors. You want to choose the 1 or 2 most pervasive behaviors. You don't want to target all of them if there are various behaviors, just because it's not feasible. Next, we want to choose 2 to 3 behavior interventions based on the hypothesized function. Again, we don't want to blindly be implementing interventions without taking their functions into consideration, because again, it can be counterproductive. Next, we want to train all staff members on interventions. Again, this will help with fidelity and consistency of the implementation, especially if we employ extinction. Extinction is when we discontinue a consequence after behavior. So for an example, if the student engages in, I think, property destruction to access the iPad, extinction would mean we would no longer provide the iPad if they engage in that property destruction. And every time we engage in extinction, there's going to be an extinction burst, meaning once we provide extinction, we're not going to allow them to access the iPad anymore if they engage in property destruction. That behavior is going to go up either in frequency or intensity or both, or even new behavior. So if all of the staff members in that classroom are not in the same kind of mindset, or they're not trained on extinction, and they provide access contingent on a behavior, then that would kind of shape their behavior to increase or to exacerbate the behaviors that was previously observed. So we want to make sure that everyone that's in the classroom that's going to be implementing the intervention is thoroughly trained and they know what the intervention is. And a good tool for this is to have a kind of binder for whatever student that is, and have the intervention there so that it can be kind of passed along consistently, so that everyone can kind of refer to it when they don't know how to react or respond to a behavior. We want to implement that intervention or those interventions for at least 4 weeks, ideally 6 weeks, but at least 4, just to make sure that those behaviors or that intervention, making sure that we're giving it enough time to kind of be effective. And then after that, if it's not effective, then we can brainstorm on either trying some different interventions, or if the team decides they need to move up to tier 2 interventions, then move up to tier 2. But making sure that we're implementing consistently so that we can more effectively determine what to do after those 4 weeks or after those 6 weeks. We want to monitor the data and notate any setting events. All decisions should be data-based. It can be difficult to determine what to do with interventions, especially if there's no data and the behavior happens very frequently, let's say upwards of, I don't know, 50 or more times a day. It's hard to determine that in your head. So if you have the data to show, hey, the behavior is increasing, it's not decreasing, then we can kind of determine what to do at that point. Because sometimes it's hard to see those trends. Sometimes they could be minimal. And even if it is minimal, then that means, it is working. Then we need to continue the intervention. So making sure that we have the data to prove it and to back it up. We're going to notate any setting events or any other confounding variables or anything that may impact the behavior or increase its display, so that we can kind of notate that in our graphs and be like, hey, there was a spike in the behavior in week 3, and that was because there was death in the family or whatnot, or there was something that was going on, and that would kind of explain why there was a spike in the behavior. Document everything. This is not only to kind of cover yourself in terms of liability, but we want to make sure that when we provide the information to myself or a behavior specialist that's coming in, everything's documented, and it kind of expedites the process rather than having to verbally go over what did you do, what didn't work, what did work. I can kind of do a records review and look at what you've already completed, and then kind of expedite the process and move forward a tier if needed. Yeah, exactly. So I have some closing notes before I go over the resources. I do want to spend give ourselves at least 5 minutes to go over the resources so I can kind of help you navigate them, because some of them are hard to navigate if you haven't accessed them before. So our closing notes, it is important to note that MTSS tiers may look quite different from school to school. So MTSS focus on the overall needs of individual students, and what may be a tier 2 intervention for one school may be a tier 1 in another. It is up to each school to develop an MTSS framework that addresses challenges specific to that school and community. So making sure that everything's individualized to your school and your students, because I know a lot of teachers that are in communication with other teachers, and of course they share resources, and they might say like, hey, this is the tier 2 intervention on my, for my students, and then you would share your tier 1, and it could very well be the same. But again, it's individualized to your classroom and your school. And the last thing here, again, is relationships matter. This is kind of the takeaway that I want you guys to have, is that teacher and student relationships is a determining factor in a student's behavior, and no teaching strategy or intervention will result in high student achievement if a positive, solid foundation is not established with that student. So making sure we're taking time out of our day to making sure we have that foundation with all of our students, especially those that are at risk. When let's say that you do the BASI, which we talked about in the beginning, and you see a student is scored out of 3 for, let's say, externalized behaviors, that can be a prompt to you, like, hey, I need to make sure I'm actively, building and maintaining a relationship with the student, because they're at risk of me having to implement a tier 1 or even a tier 2 intervention later on, if the behavior is remediated. All right, any questions for me before we go over the resources? Some of the resources you guys may be familiar with, but you may not. All right. So the first one is PBIS World. Are any of you guys familiar with PBIS World? Cool. All right, so I want to quickly go over, there might be a couple that you don't, but it seems like a couple of you already know what it is. So again, I want to go over it fairly quickly. So if you open up PBIS World, it just looks like this. At the home screen, you can look at different kinds of behaviors that could be displayed. And and it kind of goes through the process of how to address it using the different tiers of intervention. So I'm gonna go over one real quick. It also provides resources, which is great. So let's do disruptive, which seems to be prominent. So click on disruptive. So it gives a description of what disruptive may look like. They may speak out of turn, make inappropriate humorous comments, etc., etc. And it gives you, does this describe your student? Yes or no. We'll say yes. And then it would provide you a tier 1 interventions for students who are disruptive. And again, it'll give you some of the guidelines too. So we try multiple interventions, again, at least 2 to 3 or maybe 2 to 3. Each intervention should be tried a minimum of 4 weeks, and more than one intervention may be implemented at the same time. Collect and track specific data on each intervention tried and its effect. If your data indicates no progress after a minimum of 6 months, you may consider moving to tier 2 interventions. Again, 6 months is just a guideline. You may need to move tiers or move out of tiers a lot quicker than 6 months. So here are some of the interventions. There's acknowledging positive behavior, avoid power struggles, card flip, frequent home contact, and the list goes on. And then what you do basically is you pick one. So let's choose one. Let's choose take a break. It will tell you why you should do it, when it's applicable, sorry. How do you implement the breaks? And at the bottom, oh, this one doesn't have it, sorry. This is alternative, that is alternative methods of how to take breaks, but usually at the bottom here, it'll give you some resources. So let's see if we can find one with the resources. Let's see. Teach social skills. Again, it tells you why you should do it, when you should do it, how I do it. At the bottom, yeah, perfect. So it has resources and supports for techniques. So it'll give you different resources on how to implement the strategy that you choose. And you click on it, and then it just gives you that resource. All right. Another way to use it, you can just click on tier 1 or tier 2. You click on tier 1, it'll give you a comprehensive list of all the tier 1 interventions. Alrighty. Next, we'll go to, what was the next one? Affirm modules. So these modules are evidence-based practice modules that are not only good for review for teachers, but it's a good way to provide your paraprofessionals for some professional development. So if you click that, I don't think it's a hyperlink actually. If you copy and paste it, this is what the website would look like. So it's autism-focused intervention resources and modules, and then it would automatically go into the Affirm modules. You would go down and choose one. These are all evidence-based practices. Let's choose one. No. Discrete trial training, let's try that. So discrete trial training, you would select the module. You would go all the way down. It would kind of go over the format. And these usually, I think, are about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So it's a good, you just sign up and sign in, and then it would bring you to, oh wait, I already have one. It would bring you to the modules. It would just bring you to that module. And then you would go there and do, the modules usually consist of a pre-assessment test. It has some articles, it has some, and a post-assessment test. So they're pretty robust kind of modules. So they're a great resource not only for teachers again, but for paraprofessionals. The last one, I know we're running out of time, it's 3:27 already. It's CASEL. So this is for the social emotional curriculum. This is a great resource to help identify different ones. So if you copy and paste that address, it brings you to this area. I want to go over how I locate them. I'm sure there's different ways, but this is how I do it. So I would go under SEL in action. I would go down to in classrooms. And then I would go down here to SEL program guide and click the CASEL program guide. And here you would go down and they would have give you two categories, so either preschool and elementary or middle school and high school. Let's do preschool and elementary for this. Click on it. You go down, and there's a lot of information. But what helped me to kind of find different ones, I just went on the table of contents, and I went under program descriptions, and then under there you would have the different program descriptions for different SEL programs, and it breaks them down to preschool and elementary. You just click on one. I would say Mind Up. Mind Up is the one from the Goldie Hawn Foundation. And it would just give you an overview of what it is, what it goes over, and what skills it's going to help you with. Another resource that I had, thank you, Rebecca, for participating. Hope to see you soon. The last one I want to go, I know we're almost out of time, is another resource for the SEL curriculum. Where is it at? I might have closed it. No, here it is, sorry. So this is a resource I got from the BCBA, so the Santa Maria Bonita School District. This is a resource for social emotional curriculums, and it breaks it down into different purposes, which is pretty cool. So there's social skills, and these are the SELs with their how to access them and their prices. And if you go down, there's emotional regulation curriculum, and again, how to access them and their prices. And then there's a couple more areas, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, executive functioning, and it kind of goes on. So if you want this resource as well, go ahead and email me, and then I'll send this out to you as well. I noticed that a couple of you emailed me for the BASI, so I will be sending those out. And it is 3:30, and I don't want to keep you guys, so you guys can go ahead and get on with your days. But if you guys have any questions, you can unmute yourself, and I can answer any questions you may have. If not, feel free to go about your day. And again, thank you for participating. And I'm hoping I can, we'll see you guys in the future training.
Thank you very much.
No problem.